All right, let's now shift our attention to the Russia-Ukraine war now. The talks of a nuclear response are no longer in the world of hypotheticals. Now, Russia has drawn its lines that the West is now edging closer to crossing. So as Europe scrambles to arm Ukraine, there are clear fractures that are rippling through the European Union. But what is interesting is this: Moscow has warned that those who meddle might find themselves not just in the firing line, but in the crosshairs of Armageddon. Take a look at this report.
Tensions are rising fast. Russia is sharpening its stance. The warnings are becoming dangerous. European Union is targeting Russian oil. Ratcheting up the nuclear stakes, Moscow has issued its starkest warning yet, asserting that any aggression against Russia by a non-nuclear state, backed or joined by a nuclear power, will now be considered a joint attack, inviting the full wrath of Russia's nuclear doctrine. The Kremlin message is unflinching. Coalitions supporting Ukraine would be a target.
The very first missiles shot down by our air defense systems will allow us to quickly establish where and how they were produced, and most importantly, to accurately name the country of origin. We have already warned about the consequences.
US President Donald Trump on Monday announced a deal where European NATO states to buy US weaponry, particularly advanced Patriot systems, and give it to Kyiv. Along with Patriots, there's also discussions of arming Ukraine with long-range weapons to help it strike deeper inside Russia. Now the EU adopted a sweeping new package of sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine war, looking to pile more pressure on the Kremlin by lowering a price cap for Moscow's oil exports. Moscow downplayed the impact of fresh European Union sanctions on Russia's economy, saying they were illegal and would backfire. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, now joining us in the broadcast, we've got Mr. James Jackson, who's a journalist and also a political analyst. Mr. Jackson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, the Russians have made it abundantly clear that those European nations which arm Ukraine in this war effort will also end up coming in the Russian crosshairs. Do you think this is something that's been factored in when we hear leaders such as from Germany, France and the United Kingdom who are talking about sending weapons to Ukraine?
I think that the Russians haven't made that clear. What they've done is they've clearly threatened Europe many times, threatening to attack and, make it with especially Dmitry Medvedev, the former prime minister or president, threatening that Russia's borders will reach as far as Portugal. However, they haven't really acted on this. So European leaders seem to have come to the conclusion that these are empty threats, because we're 4 years into the war now. There's been belligerent language on both sides, but especially coming from Russia, and new sanctions coming from the EU. The Kaja Kallas, the EU's chief diplomatic spokesperson, has said that this is the toughest group of sanctions yet. So, Russia threatens, but they don't seem to be capable of delivering, at least not yet. Russia is extremely bogged down in Ukraine. What the long-term future of the continent will look like, however, that is up for grabs.
The long-term future of the continent is of course, what needs to be looked at. But the Russians have said that the areas from where the weapons are being moved can be targeted if Russia finds it to be necessary. But I want you to also weigh in on how Donald Trump's position on this war has changed from the time that he's assumed the presidency. Do you think Donald Trump is now increasingly, accepting to the fact that probably during the course of these negotiations with Vladimir Putin, he was being played all along about the possibility of a ceasefire, and that he now needs to change his strategy on how he deals with Vladimir Putin?
I absolutely think so. Putin and Trump seem to have a very strong rapport in recent years. They're both strongmen leaders. They both want adoration and to bash the political elite, the liberal elite. And they both don't really care that much about international law and the post-war international order, Bretton Woods institutions, national sovereignty. Of course, Putin invaded Ukraine. Trump has made comments about invading Greenland and Canada. However, Trump likes to win. And it seems like he's realized that Putin was fobbing him off by promising him a ceasefire, but then refusing to actually enact that. And he made one remark on television, which I thought was quite notable, which is that he would say, "Oh, I had a great chat with Vladimir." And then he would go home to his wife, Melania, who is from Slovenia, and said, "Oh, really? They actually bombed another city." So increasingly, Donald Trump seems frustrated. And we have to realize, as all European leaders have realized, especially Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, you have to play to Donald Trump's ego in this world. And I don't think that Donald Trump's ego is going to want or allow Ukraine to continue being bombed while he's being buttered up by Putin. He's got Europeans who are fighting for his attention. We seem to have returned to some kind of pre-modern imperial order here, where regional vassals of the global hegemon are begging for support. But ultimately, I think that they've realized that's what's in their interests.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thanks for having me.